two men believed it was amusing to embarrass a mother in front of her children, until a mechanic, wearing a grease-stained shirt, quietly stopped them in front of everyone in the store. Roderick Blaine, 42, hadn't intended to be a hero that evening. He had just completed a long shift at the mechanic shop off Greenwell Springs Road in Baton Rouge. His work shirt still had a faint odor of oil and sweat, and his back felt sore in that familiar, persistent way it did when the weather suggested rain. He intended to quickly purchase a few items: milk, eggs, perhaps some smoked sausage, and return home before his niece completed her homework. She had been staying with him for several weeks while her mom worked the late shift at the hospital. They had established a regular pattern: dinner, cartoons, spelling drills. He didn't even use a cart, opting for a handheld basket and a mental list. The store experienced a lack of congestion, yet a palpable sense of unease hung in the air. Shoppers with weary expressions, children complaining, a hurried individual quickly maneuvering past, someone proceeding at a leisurely pace. It was the sort of atmosphere where direct glances were avoided, and all desired a swift entry and exit. Roderick was in the process of his internal review and moving towards the frozen foods area. That's when he detected it, a voice distinct, piercing, rising above the subdued sounds of checkout scanners and squeaking cartwheels. A different voice then, laced with laughter. It wasn't a pleasant sound, the type that prompted a tightening of the jaw before understanding its cause. He turned, his attention drawn to the disturbance. Two men were positioned close to the freezer doors. They appeared to be about his age, perhaps slightly younger. Both wore baseball caps. One had a Bluetooth earpiece, and the other displayed a tattoo extending up his neck. Their posture seemed relaxed, but their voices did not match. They weren't shouting, but they were acting. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, stood nearby. She was wearing a faded hoodie and attempting to manage two children, a toddler in the cart and a boy around 7 years old holding on. Her daughter was upset. Her son looked down at the floor. The woman held her SNAP card tightly. Roderick initially struggled to understand every word the men spoke, but their tone conveyed their message. They said she should have waited for a man before having so many children. He thought she likely had a different partner for each child. The man with the earpiece quietly laughed, shaking his head as if the woman were a joke. Roderick halted. He stood there, 2 feet from the frozen peas, one hand still holding his basket. He observed the woman's shoulders become rigid, her jaw tighten. However, she didn't acknowledge them. She focused on her daughter, gently moving the cart back and forth as if it were a cradle. Silence filled the space. No one intervened. He looked around the aisle. The sound registered. A teenage cashier briefly looked up. An older woman close to the produce section stood motionless, feigning interest in a label. The moment lingered, as if everyone hoped it would simply disappear. It did not. Roderick advanced. He didn't move towards the woman, nor towards the man. Just forward. His heart began its familiar, heavy rhythm, the one that accompanies the confusion of anger and shame. He recognized this feeling. It wasn't precisely the moment, but it felt similar. Different people, a different location. Still, the core message remained. He observed as the young man gently pulled at his father's coat. "Father, may we simply leave?" He crouched down, murmured something into his ear. His voice was quiet, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. Silas paused. He wasn't one for conflict. Not since 1998. But something about that young man's tone. Something about the way he inquired, "Can we just go?" As if the disgrace was theirs, not the adult men. It evoked a feeling within. And suddenly, Roderick forgot about the milk and eggs. However, before he could speak, the man with the earpiece added something. A statement that halted Roderick again, this time for a completely different cause. The man with the earpiece remarked, audible to several shoppers in the aisle, that if she allocated less time to accessing food stamps and more to employment, perhaps she wouldn't require assistance. The delivery of his statement was significant. He spoke loudly, seemingly intending for the entire store to overhear. The impression was that he aimed to publicly shame her. Roderick's hand tightened around the basket, his knuckles turning pale. He remained positioned back, partially obscured by the end cap displaying canned soups. From his vantage point, he observed the woman's profile. Her cheekbones were prominent, her mouth set in a firm line. She refused to offer them the gratification of a reaction, yet her tension was palpable. Her son held her waist tightly, as if securing her position. The other man, identified by the neck tattoo, bumped his companion and scoffed, "Don't waste your breath. She's probably just going to sell that food to buy a new wig." Roderick blinked. He paused, thinking he might have misunderstood. But no, that was what he had said. Still, no one reacted. The teenage cashier averted her gaze. The woman examining the fruit labels now intently checked her phone. A young man pushing a cart filled with Gatorade steered clear of them, as if avoiding something he couldn't see. It felt as though everyone was attempting to vanish. The mother tried to remain composed. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she succumb to despair. She deliberately gave her card to the cashier, her gaze fixed on the small display as if her well-being hinged on it. The toddler had become still, aware of the strained atmosphere. Roderick released a deep breath through his nose. He was observing a woman being openly humiliated for needing assistance. A woman who, judging by her appearance, seemed to be simply attempting to manage the day with her children fed and her self-respect preserved. Two adult men, appearing as though they'd avoided regular employment for some time, seemed intent on shaming her. The situation felt disturbingly recognizable. He recalled a childhood memory of standing in line with his mother around the age of 8 or 9 at a grocery store off Plank Road. He remembered the burning embarrassment of the stairs back then, the way people looked when his mom presented food stamps. She never discussed it openly. She simply told him, "Keep your head up and hold the bag, baby." The memory triggered something within him. He moved nearer, now fully visible. "Hey," he called out, the word carrying enough volume to draw the attention of both men. The individual with the earpiece lifted an eyebrow. The other offered a smirk. Roderick maintained a composed tone. "Evenly, you consistently address women in that manner, or is it only when you presume no one will object?" The men paused, appearing uncertain whether he intended it as a jest. The man bearing the tattoo chuckled faintly. "What? Your boyfriend? Or something?" Roderick shook his head. "Nah, I'm just a man who understands the difference between a joke and bullying." That seemed to surprise them. The man with the earpiece struggled to speak. Roderick moved forward. He didn't act aggressively or threaten anyone, but he positioned himself close enough to no longer be a background voice. Close enough that people in the aisle were now paying attention. "You notice a woman with her kids. She isn't causing any trouble. She was simply attempting to purchase groceries. And you decided today was the opportune moment to display how insignificant you are?" The neck tattoo guy rolled his eyes. "Man, mind your own business." Roderick didn't blink. "This is my business. Anytime I see a grown man harass a mother in front of her children as if it were entertainment, yeah, that's my business." A silence descended. Not the kind that signifies resolution. The kind that suggests a change has occurred. The woman remained standing at the register. Her hands paused, as if uncertain whether to continue packing her bag or observe the situation. Her son looked up at Roderick, his eyes wide with confusion. Before either man could react, the manager arrived, and his initial words would drastically alter the room's atmosphere. The store manager's voice pierced the tension, crisp and concise, though somewhat delayed. "Is there a problem over here?" he inquired. He was a short man in his 50s. Heavy-framed glasses, a khaki shirt tucked into worn jeans. A name tag identified him as Vince Callahan, and his darting eyes revealed he's been observing from afar, intervening only as the volume increased. Roderick remained silent initially, wanting to ascertain the recipient of the question. The two men straightened slightly, seemingly realizing they may have overstepped. "It's nothing," the person with the tattoo stated, raising their hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were simply having a conversation," the other person added hastily. "No one made contact with her or anything." Roderick looked toward Vince, who returned his gaze, seemingly unsure of his position in the situation. "Talking?" Roderick inquired, his voice calm. Is that what you consider talking? Vince paused. Look, I just want to avoid any problems in the store. Customers are trying to make purchases. Roderick inhaled deeply. Were you prepared to allow these two men to harass a woman in front of her children rather than address the issue? Vince reacted visibly to the statement. A silence fell, and everyone remained still. The mother continued to stand quietly, her hands now carefully arranging items into a single reusable grocery bag. She showed no tears. However, her expression held a detached quality, a type of emotional barrier people develop when they've learned to mask pain for an extended period. Roderick looked at her, then back at Vince. This isn't about comfort, man. It's about right and wrong. The words weren't loud, but they carried. A woman a few feet away who had been picking out yogurt suddenly nodded and muttered, "He's right." Then someone else, an older man in a camouflage jacket, murmured, "Ain't no need to talk to a lady like that. Especially not with her babies standing there." The tide was turning. The two men sensed it. The guy with the earpiece shifted uncomfortably. He stated, his voice quieter, "We didn't intend any harm. Just some playful interaction." Roderick turned, shaking his head gently. If causing distress to someone attempting to nourish her children is your idea of fun, a serious self-assessment is necessary. He spoke with clarity, avoiding raised voices or dramatic displays, simply stating facts. The tattooed man muttered something almost inaudible and began to leave. His companion followed suit. Vince made no attempt to detain them. Roderick did not pursue them either. His purpose wasn't to engage in a confrontation. It was to be witnessed asserting himself. Someone had done it, so that woman, her kids, and anyone else in the store would know. Vince remained behind, hands on his hips. "I'll speak with them if they return," he offered, his voice lacking conviction. Roderick didn't respond to him. He turned to the woman instead. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, thank you." The little boy peered out from behind his mother's hoodie, his eyes moving between her and Roderick. He remained silent, but he no longer seemed frightened. Roderick offered the kid a small smile. "You assisted your mother today. You performed well." The boy's lips moved slightly, as though he desired to return the smile, but hesitated. The mother then spoke. "People generally remain silent. They simply observe," Roderick confirmed. "Yes, I understand. I have been one of those individuals," he stated, meaning his words sincerely. He had remained quiet in different locations, different circumstances, not out of concurrence, but because it was simpler, unlike this time. Just as things seemed to be calming, the boy spoke, causing Roderick to hesitate more than any comment from the adults. Roderick was preparing to take his basket and allow them to proceed without interruption when the boy looked up and quietly asked, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" The unexpectedness and innocence of the question stopped Roderick in his tracks. The woman immediately turned, her eyes widening. "Baby, please don't say that." Roderick chuckled softly, not in derision, but in genuine surprise. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. "No, I'm not your bodyguard," he said, "but I noticed something that seemed amiss. And sometimes, when something is wrong, it's important to speak up." The boy appeared puzzled. "Even if it's not your mother," Roderick paused. "Particularly if it's not your mother." The mother retrieved her bag and reached for her son's hand. "Say thank you," she murmured, her voice remaining calm, but detached. "Thank you," the boy replied. His voice was softer now. Roderick rose, observing their preparations to depart. The toddler had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder within the cart. The mother offered him a courteous nod, then refocused on her children and proceeded towards the door. Roderick remained standing for a moment longer, his basket dangling limply in his hand. His anger had subsided. He felt weary. Weary of encountering individuals who believed they could utter whatever they pleased to whomever, without repercussions. He was weary of seeing children learn those lessons without realizing it. He also felt frustrated by missed opportunities, moments that required the courage to speak up. He walked down the bread aisle, but suddenly everything felt wrong. He no longer felt like shopping. His appetite had disappeared near the frozen pizza. He drifted towards the self-checkout, considering he might just grab a drink, something cold, and leave. As he turned the corner, he saw them once more, the mother and her children, positioned by the vending machines close to the exit. She was searching her purse, likely looking for coins. Her son was sitting on the bench, softly rocking his sleeping sister. Roderick lessened his pace. A portion of him desired to continue walking. He believed he had already fulfilled his responsibility. However, something about her expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was weariness. The kind of weariness that doesn't dissipate with rest. The weariness that accumulates over years of being overlooked, criticized, and disregarded. He moved closer, deliberately. Got enough for the machine? He inquired. She looked up, visibly surprised. Oh, I was just checking if I'd change. She explained, adding, I told him he could choose a snack if he waited patiently. Roderick reached into his pocket and produced a few wrinkled dollar bills. Let me assist, he offered. She paused. I didn't request, she began, but he gently interrupted. You didn't. I'm offering, she finished. Her expression subtly hardened. It was pride. It mirrored the clothing his mother used to wear. It was the sort of person who prefers self-reliance, yet recognizes respectful assistance when it's provided. She nodded once, her movement now with less uncertainty. Her son selected a pack of cookies and a juice. Roderick inserted the payment and observed the machine's mechanical sounds as it dispensed the item, resembling a somewhat awkward expression of gratitude. What's your name? She asked. Roderick extended his hand. Tanya. Tanya Wells. A tremor passed between them. A connection felt beyond a simple meeting. Her gaze settled on him, clear and unwavering, devoid of gratitude or obligation. Just even. No response was needed back there, she observed. I know, Roderick replied. But I didn't want your son to perceive that silence as typical, she confessed, pausing briefly before directing her attention to her boy, who was eagerly opening a package of cookies, as if it were Christmas. I hope he remembers your face, she said, and Roderick remained silent. He was at a loss for words. However, before he could leave, Tanya posed a question he hadn't anticipated, causing him to observe her and himself with a new perspective. You got kids? Tanya inquired. Roderick was taken aback by the question. It was delivered so casually, as if requesting directions. Yet, the underlying significance felt more substantial than the words suggested. He paused, then offered a slight shrug. No, not mine anyway. My niece has been staying with me. Her mom works nights at the hospital. Tanya nodded, indicating she understood. So you're the safe place for somebody? Roderick hesitated. He hadn't previously considered that perspective. He wasn't intentionally trying to be a safe place for anyone. He was simply providing assistance, doing what was necessary. However, the way she phrased it caused a feeling of constriction in his chest. Trying to be, he replied. They paused briefly in that unusual area situated between two vending machines and an automatic door, which repeatedly opened and closed as customers passed. The exterior air grew darker. The store's illumination made the location feel colder than it actually was. Tanya carefully removed her daughter from the cart, cradling her in one arm. The toddler shifted, appearing drowsy but making no noise. You don't speak as if you're frightened, she stated. I wasn't, Roderick responded. He didn't express a desire for a confrontation, she observed, receiving a slight smile in response. I've experienced conflict before, he stated. It hasn't altered much. Words did today. Roderick remained silent initially, because, honestly, he wasn't certain what the day had altered, if anything at all. The men departed as if everything were normal. Vince, the manager, offered little resistance. The majority of onlookers simply remained still and watched. However, her son had smiled, and Tanya was still present, standing tall. That surely had to signify something. At that moment, the automatic door opened once more, and the two men from before re-entered. Roderick's body stiffened immediately. Tanya's did too. She held her daughter closer. Her son slid off the bench and moved behind her, as if trying to disappear. However, the men didn't glance in their direction. They kept their gaze ahead, bypassed Roderick entirely, and proceeded toward the rear of the store. Perhaps they would return for beer, or perhaps they had simply forgotten something. They remained silent. They avoided eye contact. They didn't even acknowledge our presence. Roderick didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. Tanya released a long, deep breath. I anticipated an attempt. They will not, Roderick stated calmly. Not tonight. A few feet away, the teenage cashier, the same one who had averted her gaze previously, was now maneuvering a small cart of returns toward the register. She halted as she passed Roderick. I observe what you did, she said quietly. Roderick turned to her. She looked over at Tanya and her children. I regret not saying anything, she thought. Roderick nodded thoughtfully. You will next time. The girl offered a slight, almost self-conscious smile and departed. She made no attempt to turn back. Tanya looked down at her son. Come on, dear. He clasped her hand, holding tightly onto the cookie pack. Roderick observed them as they walked towards the parking lot. The little girl, now fully awake and rubbing her eyes against her mother's shoulder. Tanya glanced back once, their eyes connecting briefly. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a farewell. Simply a silent recognition, genuine and sufficient. He turned to depart, retrieving his overlooked basket, stepping back to do so. Yet, something felt altered. The eggs could wait. So too could the milk. As he walked out into the night, a personal realization sparked within him, a feeling connected to his past that he hadn't considered in years, triggering a memory with unexpected force. Roderick did not go home immediately. He remained in his truck in the parking lot, with the window rolled halfway down, allowing the warm Baton Rouge air to flow in as the sky transitioned from gray to black. The grocery store lights hummed behind him, fluorescent and seemingly without end, stretching long shadows across the parking lot. He gazed forward for a considerable time, his hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, not because he anticipated something, simply thinking, dwelling on a weighty feeling. That boy's question, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" repeated in his mind, and the way Tanya had said, "You're the safe place for somebody." He hadn't anticipated either of those sentiments to linger, but they had. The recollection that surfaced wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle and understated. Perhaps that's why it affected him so deeply. He was 10, waiting in line with his mother at a corner store just outside Port Allen. It was summer, and his shoes were 2 sizes too small. His mother had been working 3 part-time jobs since his dad left. On that day, her EBT card malfunctioned. The cashier, a man with a slicked-back mullet, told her to move aside. Publicly. Next, the man announced, "This woman can't pay." Roderick recalled hearing sighs and shuffles from the people trailing behind them. Someone even chuckled. His mother didn't shed any tears. She simply stood, attempting to understand where things had gone amiss. Her hands had shaken as she entered the numbers on the keypad. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, as though intense focus might somehow resolve the issue. A man in a gray work shirt, a stranger standing behind them, moved forward and paid. He did so silently, without a word or explanation, simply sliding a 20 across the counter as if it were inconsequential. Roderick also remembered the man's boots. They were scuffed. The clothes were soiled, as if he'd worn them for years. His mother expressed her gratitude 3 times. The man simply replied, "It's all right," and departed. Roderick never forgot that. Not because of the money, but because for one moment someone chose to prevent his mom from feeling insignificant. And now, all these years later, he'd unknowingly become that man. He leaned back in his seat and rubbed his hands over his face. Safe place for somebody, he muttered, half to himself. He hadn't always gotten it right. There had been moments he remained silent when he ought to have spoken, instances where he averted his gaze. But tonight he did not, and that felt significant, not a resolution, but a beginning. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the small notebook where he recorded grocery lists and budget details. He turned to the rear, located a vacant page, and penned 3 words. Speak. Stand. Stay. He wasn't certain why he wrote them that way, but it felt correct. Like a prompting, like a key. A collection of teenagers in hoodies walked by his truck, laughing and jostling each other, having just left the store with Slurpees and bags of chips. One of them made eye contact and offered a brief nod of recognition. It wasn't elaborate, just a quick movement of the chin. Roderick returned the gesture subtly. He started the engine. The radio began playing softly, featuring an old Otis Redding song. He allowed it to play for a minute before lowering the volume. As he continued his journey, he observed a city bus stop where a mother and her daughter waited, illuminated by the weak light of a street lamp. The young girl rested against her mom's shoulder, seemingly dozing. Roderick reduced his speed as he rounded the bend. That scene also resonated with him. He thought of so many mothers in this area, striving to manage everything, holding on with worn-out resources, and bearing the burden of groceries, children, and societal expectations as if it were simply an obligation. Sadly, they often go unnoticed. He drove into his driveway, turned off the truck, and paused for a moment. But prior to entering the house, he reviewed the notebook one last time, making a silent vow that would resonate well into the future. Roderick stood on his porch beneath a wavering light bulb. The screen door groaned as he opened it. Inside, the modest house held the scent of aged timber and laundry detergent. Lainey was curled up on the couch under a blanket, a textbook resting on her knees and a pencil in her mouth. She looked up as he entered. "You're gone forever," she said. He dropped his keys onto the side table. "Yeah, I ran into something unexpected." "Like what?" Roderick hesitated. She asked it so casually, unaware that her uncle had just been standing between a mother and two grown men poised to overwhelm her regarding a shopping trip. How would you explain that to a 12-year-old so it doesn't feel overwhelming? "I witnessed someone being treated unfairly." I said something. Lainey looked at him. "Did you argue with him?" He chuckled, sounding weary. "No, it wasn't necessary." "Did it make a difference?" He nodded. "It did." Lainey returned to her book, as if that was a sufficient explanation, but Roderick remained standing. He found himself repeatedly recalling Tanya's expression, or her son's inquiry, or the realization that for a brief period that grocery store had served as a learning experience, not only for a frightened little boy or a weary young mother, but for all those within hearing distance, and for him. Roderick had previously believed that demonstrating courage meant confronting situations directly and forcefully, that unless it involved a significant display, it was inconsequential. However, tonight brought a shift in perspective. As his actions were met with silence rather than recognition, they did not become a popular topic. No phones were used. There were no news reports, no widely shared videos. Just a mother, a child, and a man who chose to act instead of remaining silent. Perhaps that's what the world needs, discreet actions that have a subtle impact. Ordinary individuals who recognize an injustice and voice their concerns, prioritizing integrity over apathy. He entered the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. His hands remained stiff. He didn't notice until he placed the cup on the counter. Lainey's lunchbox sat on the counter. He opened it, almost automatically, to see if she's left anything behind. Inside, he found a half-eaten apple and a note he's written her earlier that morning. "You got this. I'm proud of you." He paused, looking at it. 4 short words on a sticky note. And she's kept it. That affected him more than he anticipated, because it reminded him that words don't need to be forceful to resonate. They don't have to be flawless to be significant. He returned to the living room, settled beside Lainey, and observed the math homework she was finding difficult. "Do you need some help?" she offered, silently passing him a pencil. While they solved the problems together, he looked at her. This small, brilliant, stubborn girl, unaware of how frequently the world would challenge her and how vital it would be to advocate for those unable to do so themselves. He wished she would retain this memory of him. He wanted her to recognize someone who championed another person, unrelated and undeserving of such action, yet still in need of protection. That's the essence of strength he hoped she'd see. After finishing the final problem, Lainey looked up and said, "You're like one of the good guys, huh?" Roderick smiled, a genuine smile this time. He tried to convey. She nodded, seeming pleased. "Good." A silence fell between them. The television hummed softly in the background. A dog barked once from somewhere beyond, then fell silent. Roderick relaxed against the couch, allowing the stillness to descend. He wasn't obligated to act as a bodyguard. He simply needed to demonstrate that he cared. And for this evening, that was sufficient. Should you ever witness someone facing unjust treatment, and feel compelled to intervene, honor that impulse. Offer a word. Take action. Even minor deeds hold significance. They instruct. They safeguard. They are important. If this narrative resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Perhaps someone else needs to read this today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Real stories like this deserve to be shared. After a black woman CEO experienced denial of service at her bank, she maintained composure. Within 5 minutes, the manager responsible for the incident was terminated. The errand was intended to be brief, approximately 10 to 15 minutes, a task easily managed between scheduled meetings. That morning, Nadira Langston, aged 48, the head of a multi-million-dollar tech firm located in Phoenix, Arizona, exited her driver's black Lincoln and entered Sycamore First Bank, carrying her company's banking portfolio carefully. She was unhurried. There was no need for haste. Her schedule had been completely free to allow her to complete the transfer of a substantial business account, which was one of several her company had been relocating for months. The account manager she typically collaborated with had retired, and today she was meeting the new team in person to finalize the documents. A simple, standard procedure. Her navy blue suit was expertly tailored. Her hair was styled in a neat, low bun, and she wore diamond studs in her ears. Understated, yet refined. Her heels made no clicking sound as she moved. They barely rustled. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had held a position of authority for a significant period and no longer felt the need to demonstrate it. Approaching the reception desk, she provided her name, Nadira Langston. She explained she was there to meet with someone from the commercial accounts department. The young woman at the counter glanced up, briefly nodding while entering information into the system. Okay, just a moment. It was then that things began. A woman, appearing to be in her mid-50s, with pale blonde hair and a rigid posture, emerged from a nearby glass office and walked over, offering a smile that seemed strained. "Can I help you with something?" she inquired. Her voice was concise. Nadira turned and offered her hand. "Yes, thank you. I'm Nadira Langston. I understand I'm scheduled to meet with someone from the business team. I'm completing a transfer." The woman didn't return the handshake. She looked at the folder Nadira held. "And you are representing which company?" "I'm the CEO of Bluestone Dynamics." The account was previously managed by Peter Larson before his retirement. The manager raised an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "And you're here, unaccompanied?" "Yes," Nadira responded calmly. "It's a private matter." A pause followed, one of those pauses that conveys more than a complete sentence, the kind where judgment is disguised as confusion. "Right?" the woman said, adjusting her position. "We generally don't permit walk-ins for high-tier accounts unless it has been arranged beforehand." Nadira stated, still calm. She retrieved the confirmation email. "Here's the appointment confirmation from your internal scheduler. Today, 9:30 a.m. The woman looked at the document, then back at Nadira. "Are you certain this wasn't intended for another employee at your organization?" Nadira blinked, deliberately and slowly. "I operate the company." A brief silence followed. "My name is Cheryl Bainbridge. I'm the branch manager. We're dealing with some concerning events lately. Individuals have been falsely presenting their credentials to gain access to valuable accounts. You appreciate the seriousness of this, I'm sure." Nadira fully grasped the situation. "Cheryl, is it?" she replied, her tone remaining calm and measured. "Offering my license, corporate ID, and the transaction papers I'm here to approve?" Cheryl's smile became strained. "It's simply procedure, Ms. Langston. Please don't view it as directed at you." Nadira had encountered that phrase on countless occasions, in numerous boardrooms, airport lounges, and hotel lobbies. However, before she could add anything, Cheryl motioned to the receptionist. "Could you please contact security?" Just to err on the side of caution. It was necessary to confirm her statements. Nadira's mouth remained still. Her tone remained consistent. "Are you summoning security?" she asked. "On the CEO of one of our most important prospective clients?" Cheryl's shoulders became even more rigid. "I didn't suggest that," I replied. "I simply stated we needed to verify." At that moment, a subtle change occurred within the room. A quiet hum arose from a man seated in the waiting area. A brief look passed between two tellers positioned behind the counter. A palpable shift occurred. It was evident Nadira had followed every procedure correctly, yet she was still being made to feel like an outsider. Nadira, however, was not prepared to accept the situation. Not this time. The bank lobby wasn't crowded, but sufficient people were present to observe the unfolding events. An older man, waiting in line, moved uncomfortably. A woman seated close to the loan office took out her phone, feigning a check of her email, but her gaze remained fixed on Nadira and Cheryl. The security guard was not yet present, but Cheryl remained steadfast, as if anticipating immediate reinforcement. Nadira carefully opened her folder. It contained all necessary documentation to confirm her identity: business cards, certified articles of incorporation, 2 forms of identification, and the bank's own records confirming the account transfer. She arranged them on the reception desk methodically, similar to a card dealer. Composed. Accurate. Here, she stated, that is my Arizona state ID. This document confirms my company's EIN. It includes the board resolution authorizing me as the account signer. In this, she indicated the final sheet, is your bank's welcome letter. Cheryl briefly reviewed the papers. Anyone can print documents, she stated, crossing her arms. I've worked in banking for 27 years. I've seen people pretend to be CFOs, consultants, even heirs to estates. We don't make exceptions just because someone claims they're important. Nadira's tone remained steady, but her eyes narrowed. So this isn't about the paperwork? It's about how I appear, correct? Cheryl let out a dismissive sound. I beg your pardon. You heard me. If I presented myself as a 55-year-old man in a Brooks Brothers suit, you'd be extending a handshake and offering coffee. Ma'am, please reduce your voice volume. Nadira responded. My voice is already subdued, her words sharp and clear. I am the CEO. You have reviewed the documents. You know my name. The only thing that seemed to register was that I wasn't what they anticipated. A silence followed. A protracted, uncomfortable silence, and then Cheryl spoke. It wasn't a shout, but it carried. You just don't look like a CEO? The statement lingered, heavy as smoke after a match. Someone inhaled sharply. Another person murmured, did she really just say that? The receptionist stood motionless behind the desk. She appeared to wish she could simply vanish. Nadira's eyelids lowered deliberately, yet her voice remained steady. I have secured more than $80 million in venture capital. I have spearheaded 3 product launches. I have presented as a keynote speaker at CES and finalized agreements in 6 countries. I don't need to appear any particular way to be completely myself. Cheryl began to respond. However, before she could, Nadira shifted slightly and asked the receptionist, is there a regional director assigned to this branch? The young woman nodded hesitantly. He is present today, in fact. It's a surprise audit. He's in the back conference room. Nadira's lips formed a slight smile. Excellent. I wish to speak with him. Then, Cheryl intervened once more, visibly agitated. There's no necessity for that. I am capable of managing this. Let's avoid making the situation worse. Nadira faced her directly. You have already worsened this. You summoned security. You rejected every form of identification I presented. You challenged my position, my firm, and my credibility, all without initiating a single phone call to confirm any detail. Therefore, no, you're not capable of handling this. The room fell silent. The receptionist lifted the phone and initiated a call to an internal extension. Mr. Dorsey? She inquired. There is someone present requesting to speak with you. Her name is Nadira Langston from Bluestone Dynamics. A brief hesitation. Yes. All right. I will inform him. She ended the call and turned to Nadira, her eyes displaying surprise. He is on his way out now. Meanwhile, Cheryl remained unaware of the significant misjudgment she had made. The door situated at the rear of the bank swung open, and a tall man, dressed in a charcoal suit, emerged. He moved with a brisk, purposeful stride, alert but not hurried. He held a slim leather tablet and wore an expression suggesting displeasure at being interrupted from meetings. However, his expression softened immediately when he saw Nadira. Nadira Langston, he said, extending his hand. She shook it firmly. Yes, you must be Mr. Dorsey. He continued, Matthew Dorsey, Regional Director. I've heard a lot about you. Peter spoke very highly before he retired. We appreciate the opportunity to manage your accounts. Cheryl's mouth parted slightly, and her face paled. Matthew turned to her, appearing puzzled. Did something go wrong with the meeting? Cheryl struggled to find the right words. Yes, there was. I simply verified the credentials before providing access to the commercial suite. This follows our standard procedure. Nadira remained silent. She didn't need to. The receptionist, still positioned behind the counter, added cautiously. She contacted security, sir. She stated that we were unable to verify the client's identity. Matthew blinked. You contacted security? Regarding Ms. Langston? I was attempting to adhere to established procedures. Cheryl responded promptly. We've experienced individuals recently presenting fabricated business credentials. I prefer not to assume any risks. You understand how crucial our commercial accounts are. He gave her a direct look. Yes, I am aware. This is why we verify credentials, rather than form assessments of clients based on subjective impressions. Cheryl's shoulders tightened. Excuse me? She began. I've reviewed the compliance logs. You didn't even access the file she presented. You disregarded the scheduled appointment. You dismissed the identification. I was safeguarding the bank, she asserted. You embarrassed the bank, Matthew retorted. You've publicly humiliated one of the most significant clients we've on board this year. In view of customers, in view of staff, with no justification. A security guard finally arrived at the front entrance, his radio clipped to his belt, meticulously scanning the room, as if anticipating trouble. Matthew dismissed him with a wave. Everything's fine here, Eric, Cheryl repeated, her voice now trembling. False alarm. She had entered alone. Her name wasn't on the standard schedule. It was on the revised internal schedule, the one your assistant oversees. The same schedule you approve every Monday morning. You simply didn't review it, Nadira stated, stepping forward slightly, her voice low but clear. You hadn't acted without delay because of an absence. You paused because I didn't align with your preconceived notion of who should possess such authority. Matthew remained silent, allowing the quiet to linger. There was nothing further to elaborate on. Cheryl's mouth opened once more, but she spoke no words. Ms. Langston, Matthew stated, pivoting with a return to decorum. Would you be willing to accompany me? I will personally oversee your transaction from my office. Nadira acknowledged with a single nod. Certainly. They started to leave, passing the lines of desks and glass-walled offices. Cheryl stayed still by the front desk, her eyes wide, her face unreadable. No one moved towards her. The receptionist looked at her keyboard. The security guard walked away slowly, seeming unsure of what to do. Just as they were about to vanish down the hallway, Matthew halted and turned. Cheryl looked up, clearly surprised. My office. After this meeting, we'll be discussing your role here in detail. He didn't raise his voice. Wasn't necessary. However, Cheryl already sensed a change in the atmosphere. Matthew's office presented a crisp, though understated, impression. It featured clean lines, 2 chairs positioned across from his desk, and a tall window allowing morning light to spread across the carpet. Nadira waited until he invited her to sit, and even then, she maintained a straight posture and a composed demeanor. He closed the door softly, then turned back to face her. Ms. Langston, I want to apologize for what just happened. That should not have occurred. Not here. Not anywhere. You were treated unfairly, Nadira stated calmly, placing her folder on the desk. However, this isn't the first time. It probably won't be the last, Matthew responded, leaning against the edge of his desk. We have protocol for a reason, to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening. Cheryl disregarded every step. She didn't just disregard protocol, Nadira said. She formed an opinion of me immediately upon seeing my face. Matthew breathed out his nose, crossing his arms. I acknowledge that. He resumed looking at the documents she had placed before him, reviewing them without speaking. He wasn't hurried. He was carefully considering everything. Everything is in the correct order, he stated. I never questioned it. However, I do want to inquire. Did she allow you any opportunity to provide an explanation before summoning security? Not really, Nadira responded. She recognized my name, saw my face, and heard my title, yet still inquired if the appointment belonged to another person. Matthew rubbed his jaw. That will present a challenge for her. A significant one. Nadira inclined her head. I didn't intend for anyone to lose their job. I am aware of that. However, sometimes repercussions are deserved. Immediately, his office phone vibrated. He answered, listened briefly, then instructed, send her in. A knock followed shortly, and Cheryl entered. The usual assuredness had vanished. Her face was pale, her shoulders slightly hunched. She walked as if unsure how to position her hands or where to look. Ms. Langston, she began, her voice quiet. I owe you an apology. I was mistaken. That wasn't my goal. You don't have to pretend, Nadira stated, interrupting. Her voice wasn't harsh, only resolute. You acted precisely as you did. You didn't believe I was who I claimed to be. And instead of verifying, you chose to embarrass me. Cheryl looked to Matthew, visibly wanting him to intervene. He remained silent. I've spent over 2 decades in this field, she continued. I've witnessed fraud, identity theft, all sorts of deception. And none of that pertains to me, Nadira stated. You didn't err due to caution. You err because you believed you could evade detection, Matthew finally said. Cheryl, following a review of events this morning, encompassing internal audit records and client appointment logs, I have decided to end your employment, effective immediately. Cheryl blinked. And? Are you serious? Yes, I am, Matthew replied. You breached client protocol, showed disrespect to one of our most valuable account holders, and created a public disturbance that jeopardized the bank's reputation. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a pattern, and it concludes here. She appeared ready to retaliate, but the atmosphere offered no space for her to exert herself. She faced Nadira. I didn't intend to cause you any personal offense, she said. You didn't offend me, Nadira replied softly. You showed disrespect. There's a distinction. Cheryl lowered her gaze, then pivoted, exited the doorway, and left it slightly open. Matthew remained still for a moment. Subsequently, he settled into his desk chair and raised his head. I trust that achieves a degree of responsibility. This is a beginning, Nadira responded. However, beyond the confines of that office, the narrative was quickly moving away from the bank. Information doesn't spread rapidly within a bank, except when a significant event occurs. And what unfolded that morning at Sycamore was not merely significant, it was irrefutable. As Nadira and Matthew left the office, the ambience in the lobby had fundamentally changed. Patrons remained silent. Tellers murmured behind their workstations. Cheryl's absence was more pronounced than her presence had ever been. The nameplate had already been taken from the front glass office, as if she had never worked there. Matthew walked Nadira out personally. I'll ensure the rest of the paperwork is managed by someone capable, he said. You shouldn't have to experience this level of absurdity. Ever. Nadira nodded. Accepting the folder, he returned to her. The paperwork is the straightforward part, she replied. He gave a quiet, respectful laugh. Indeed, they arrived at the front doors, where 2 customers graciously held them open. A teller rose from behind the counter and offered a small wave, hesitant yet genuine. The sun was ascending higher above Phoenix. The air was dry, and the pavement was warm. Nadira hesitated close to the curb, her driver advancing, the car door already ajar. She glanced back at Matthew. A statement you made in your office resonated with me, that occasionally consequences are deserved. He affirmed this with a nod. Yes, I agree, she stated, but repercussions lacking comprehension do little to affect change. Matthew lifted his eyebrows, showing interest. I don't want Cheryl to experience hardship, Nadira proceeded. I need people to understand this wasn't about me. This occurs for Black professionals, particularly women, on a daily basis. It happens at airports, restaurants, stores, and meetings. And frequently, no one faces termination. They're simply disregarded. Again and again, he remained silent. He allowed her to continue. Perhaps for the first time, someone like him genuinely listened. If the bank is to address this with seriousness, she stated, Refrain from simply publishing a statement online. Avoid issuing a standard apology. Initiate a dialogue. Instruct your managers regarding the oversights made. Prevent this from recurring for the next woman who enters that establishment. Matthew inhaled deeply, his posture now slightly more burdened. You are correct. I am unable to reverse the events that transpired. However, I can ensure they contribute to a positive outcome. That's the true measure, isn't it? Nadira responded. Not what one accomplishes with an audience, but what one alters when unobserved. She entered the vehicle, and the door closed behind her. The interior was quiet, but the silence felt clean. Her driver glanced back through the mirror. Everything satisfactory, Ms. Langston? She looked at her hands, then out the window at the glass facade of the bank. Cheryl had resolved to ignore her. The crucial decision, the one that would have significant impact, had already been made by someone else. Yes, it has, she said softly. Nadira didn't know that within 24 hours the entire country would be discussing what transpired inside that branch. It began with a tweet, just a few lines from someone who had been sitting near the loan officer's desk that morning. Just witnessed a black woman CEO get denied service at her own bank. She remained composed, publicly addressed the bias, and the manager was terminated immediately. I don't know her name, but I won't forget her demeanor. By lunchtime, the tweet had surpassed 40,000 likes. By evening, it appeared on Instagram, then Facebook, and subsequently on local news. A local blogger identified Nadira's name by comparing information with a press release Bluestone Dynamics released earlier that month. A Phoenix reporter verified the information with the bank. By nightfall, Nadira Langston was trending across the nation. She made no public statements. Wasn't necessary. Others shared their experiences. LinkedIn was filled with accolades. Corporate professionals, frequently black women, recounted similar situations, being questioned at the valet of their own office buildings, asked to show ID 3 times before boarding first-class flights, being addressed as sweetie, even while leading negotiations worth millions. People described Nadira as graceful, resilient, and composed. However, those who understood the situation better explained that it was more than grace. It was a matter of survival. Simultaneously, Sycamore First corporate headquarters mobilized. Within 24 hours, they issued a statement recognizing the incident, confirming Cheryl Bainbridge's departure from employment, and affirming the company's dedication to equity and continued training. This response proved insufficient for the public. Numerous comments appeared, questioning how many other Cheryls remain working in your branches. And do your executives grasp that implicit bias training cannot address issues permitted by your hiring processes? Black women should not be expected to remain composed when facing disrespect. Nadira made no public statements regarding the situation until 3 days later when she consented to an interview on a podcast hosted by a longtime friend and business strategist, Leona Bates. They faced each other in a silent studio in Tempe, with microphones activated and without any prepared notes. Leona began softly, asking, "You've remained silent while the internet has erupted. What prompted this response now?" Nadira answered, "Because the matter is no longer about me." Leona focused on what this situation highlighted. Specifically, that despite possessing the correct titles, documents, and credentials, people still perceive you as an outsider. Speaking out is then labeled as causing a disturbance, while remaining quiet is interpreted as agreement. It's a draining predicament, regardless of the choice. They discussed the matter for almost an hour, extending beyond the bank to address the significant emotional burden of maneuvering within established hierarchies while burdened by long-standing prejudices. Nadira remained composed. She didn't express sadness or frustration. Instead, she simply stated the facts, clearly, steadily, and without question. Following the broadcast, a fresh surge of interest emerged. This interest was authentic, thoughtful, and not superficial. Fellow CEOs contacted her. Business publications featured the narrative. A headline declared, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar." Nevertheless, Nadira maintained a grounded perspective. She did not desire recognition. She sought transformation. and she understood that meaningful change rarely appears in news headlines. The bias appeared in hiring practices, policy decisions, and even in determining who was initially believed. Even after the initial news coverage faded and the events became part of collective memory, those who witnessed her that morning at the bank still remembered what they saw. A few weeks later, Nadira addressed a room full of college students at Arizona State University. She had not intended to give any public speeches that season, as her schedule was already very full. When a business ethics professor contacted her and requested a conversation with her class, she readily agreed. The event was understated. There were no stage lights or press coverage, just 40 students, some taking notes in notebooks, others using laptops, eager to hear from the woman whose experience transformed a regular bank visit into a nationwide conversation. She presented no slides. There was no podium. She simply walked to the room's front, paused, and began speaking. "I won't be telling a storybook narrative," she stated. "I won't be suggesting that if you labor diligently, no one will challenge you, because that isn't invariably accurate." The room fell silent, all attentive. You can possess the title, the suit, the contracts, the track record, and still be informed that you don't belong, not due to any failings on your part, but because someone else cannot envision your triumph without a face resembling their own. She surveyed the room. Her voice remained gentle, but each word resonated. And in those moments, a choice presents itself. Do you contract to ease their discomfort, or do you maintain your full presence, even if it creates tension in the space? A young man seated in the front row raised his hand. He asked, "How did you manage to remain composed during that experience? Weren't you feeling anger?" Nadira responded with a slow nod. "Naturally, I was. But anger is only valuable if you understand how to channel it. That day, I employed it to remain grounded. I employed that tactic to ensure she couldn't dismiss me without looking me in the eye while doing it." Another hand then rose, this time from a young woman. "What advice would you offer someone just beginning, who hasn't developed a resume like yours?" Nadira hesitated. "Recognize your value before anyone else attempts to define it for you. And if they try to diminish you, speak regardless, even if your voice trembles." There is a certain quality to her delivery, as if she were addressing herself as much as the listener. Following the presentation, students formed a line to express their gratitude. Some simply desired to shake her hand. Others sought guidance. One young woman, speaking softly, shared, "I'm studying engineering. I'm considering dropping out. I didn't believe there was a place for someone with my background." Nadira responded, making direct eye contact, "There is. And if there isn't, create it." That evening, back in her office, Nadira found herself alone at her desk, enjoying a cup of tea. Her inbox remained full. Her phone continued to buzz. The excitement hadn't fully subsided. She understood that the public's attention would fade. However, certain individuals would retain the memory. The students, the customers present in that bank lobby, the employees who witnessed a manager lose her position due to someone's unwillingness to yield. And perhaps, in the future, when a woman like her entered a place where she wasn't anticipated, she might be greeted instead of questioned. She might be respected, all because of one moment, one voice, one refusal to remain silent. If this story resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Change doesn't always begin with prominent demonstrations or widespread media attention. Occasionally, it originates with a composed, persistent voice that states, "This isn't right." After a reserved black girl experiences severe bullying at her new school, no one intervenes until her father, a man with a concealed past he's long tried to keep hidden, resolves to speak out. Imani Reddick stood near the side entrance of Halston Middle School, clutching her backpack strap until her fingers hurt. She didn't cry. That wasn't her way. She remained silent, her chin slightly lowered, observing the stream of students who didn't even acknowledge her. She had discovered that remaining unnoticed could offer more protection than being visible. Mobile, Alabama, was not her home. Her home was Savannah, or at least it had been, that old brick apartment with the broken mailbox and the familiar smell of fried fish every Sunday. But her father insisted they needed a fresh beginning. Consequently, They were now living in a duplex with 2 white walls and neighbors who offered no greetings. Her initial week at Halston High had been largely uneventful. The teachers were courteous, her coursework was within her abilities, and the cafeteria food was acceptable. Children possessed a remarkable ability to detect subtle shifts, much like dogs identifying fear. Imani rarely spoke unless necessary. Her father often remarked that her voice carried weight, and she avoided using it for casual conversation. Her hair was styled in precise twists, her shoes were polished, and her clothes were neatly pressed. She presented a simple, intelligent appearance, avoiding anything ostentatious, simply careful. She actively avoided drawing attention to herself. However, on Thursday, attention sought her out regardless. She walked along the B Hall corridor, on her way to science class, when a tall boy with sunburned cheeks and a smug look blocked her path. "Hey," he said, tilting his head like a puppy feigning friendliness. "You don't talk much, do you?" Imani blinked at him, uncertain if it was a question or a challenge. "What's wrong?" he pressed. "Are you too good to say hi?" She replied softly, attempting to move past. He shifted aside and bumped her shoulder, causing her to stumble slightly. "Chill out." She simply acknowledged him. He didn't respond, continuing his walk, his heartbeat quickening unexpectedly. His name was Tyler McHale. She discovered this later during gym class, when he erupted in laughter during a basketball game and called another student slow as hell, a comment audible to everyone in the room. The other boys joined in his laughter. Even the coach remained largely silent. Tyler McHale was known for a certain behavior, though it was rarely spoken of directly. He belonged to that category of children best left undisturbed, especially if you valued tranquility. Imani recognized the pattern. He possessed the hallmarks: boisterous, presumptuous, and exhibiting a subtle cruelty that often escaped adult observation. That evening, at their residence, her father posed the customary inquiry. "How was school, dear?" She responded with a slight lift of her shoulders. "Okay. Anyone causing you difficulties?" She denied it with a headshake. Darius Reddick scrutinized her expression. His gaze was penetrating. It didn't gloss over details. She held his gaze for a moment, then averted her eyes and began to play with her fork. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" he said. "I know." She didn't elaborate. He didn't press. He always respected boundaries. That's what he's taught her since she was little. A reserved child isn't fragile. They're simply waiting for the appropriate moment to share. Imani hoped that principle still applied. But the atmosphere of Halston was altered. This wasn't Savannah. This wasn't the neighborhood where Miss Charlene looked after her when her dad worked late, or where Mr. Jalen across the street gave her peppermints on Sundays. This place didn't feel like it had people, just moving pieces. On Friday, Tyler walked past her in the lunch line and accidentally knocked her tray sideways. Chicken tenders and mashed potatoes hit the floor. "Oh, my bad," he said with a smirk. "Didn't see you there." Some kids laughed. Others looked away. The cafeteria monitor hardly looked up. Imani crouched to gather the tray, her cheeks flushed but her expression unreadable. She remained silent, simply tidying up and moving to the rear of the queue. Tyler departed as if everything was normal. However, it was significant, especially for her. But that was only the start, and the most difficult moments were still to come. By the second week, the cafeteria event felt like an introduction. Tyler had made it his purpose. Imani didn't understand why. Perhaps it stemmed from her lack of visible reaction compared to others. Or maybe because she didn't appear afraid, despite feeling it. Regardless, Tyler perceived this as a challenge. Initially, it manifested as hushed comments behind her in the hallway. This escalated to staged applause when she responded to questions in class. Following her excellent score on an English pop quiz, he publicly questioned, what's she attempting to demonstrate? Trying to be the teacher's favorite or something. During gym class one day, she was the last person chosen for teams. Tyler, positioned beside the student selecting players, whispered, "She probably doesn't even sweat like the rest of us, but she thinks she's too good to stink." He spoke loud enough for 3 other boys to overhear. They laughed. Imani didn't respond. Her lack of reaction served as her shield. However, silence can sometimes exacerbate the situation. By Wednesday, the conflict escalated to physical actions. One morning, she entered class to discover someone had written "mute monkey" across her desk in pencil. She paused, studying the words briefly before retrieving her eraser. Her hand moved deliberately as she erased. She detected muffled laughter nearby. Later that afternoon, in the hallway, Tyler passed by and murmured, "Better get used to it." That evening, she returned home with a torn strap on her backpack. Her father immediately observed the damage. "What happened?" Darius inquired. "It got caught in the locker hinge," she replied. He remained silent, not meeting her gaze for a significant pause. Then, in a measured tone, he asked, "You sure about that?" She confirmed with a nod. "Yeah." Darius observed her for a few more seconds, his expression strained. He rose, proceeded to the kitchen, and opened a drawer. Returning with an antique sewing kit, he began to mend the strap while she sat at the table, feigning study. The quiet returned. It wasn't oppressive, just commonplace. She understood he was hesitant. She also recognized he would wait however long she required. A tightness began to build within her, feelings she couldn't articulate. Friday proved to be particularly difficult. During lunchtime, Tyler positioned himself directly across from her, without an invitation or a tray, simply offering a smile. "You don't enjoy conversation, do you?" he remarked, tapping the table with his fingers. "Are you one of those peculiar individuals? Do you believe yourself superior to others?" Imani continued eating, deliberately slow, bite after bite. "I asked you a question," he stated, raising his voice. "Or are you too unintelligent to respond?" Those nearby began to observe the exchange. Several phones were unavailable. Imani glanced up at last. "No," she stated. "No what?" she asked. "I don't believe I'm improved. I simply dislike waste." Immediately after the words were spoken, a plate of spaghetti launched from the periphery. It struck her chest, coating her shirt with red sauce and onto her lap. Amusement rang out. She rose deliberately, making no effort to clean the sauce, simply fixing her gaze on Tyler. His eyes widened, not with fear, merely with surprise. The lunch monitor arrived, predictably late. "What happened?" she asked, her expression already frustrated. Imani remained silent, instead choosing to gather her tray and proceed to the closest trash can. Sauce dripped, and her shirt was stained. Her heart pounded in her chest. That night, she skipped dinner. Her father knocked twice on her door before entering. She was seated on the floor, altering the shirt in her sketch pad, drawing thick black lines over what used to be white cotton. "Baby girl," he said quietly. She didn't answer. He came and sat beside her. "I've been keeping my peace," he said, "trying to let you breathe, give you time. But I know something's going on, and I ain't the type to just sit back while my daughter's hurting." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I can handle it." "I know you can," he said. However, that shouldn't necessarily be the case. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was how near things were to spiraling out of control. It happened the following Tuesday. The school day felt long and tiresome. Imani kept her head down, remained in the back of classrooms, and avoided the cafeteria entirely. She learned which bathrooms were usually empty, which hallways had working cameras, and which ones didn't. However, you can't account for everything. Following sixth period, she was walking along the east hallway. The walls were bare, the lockers were damaged, and there was little movement. Her backpack felt unusually heavy, not due to books, but from the burden she carried within. Feelings of anger, shame, and a nameless sensation that lingered behind her eyes, occasionally causing them to sting without explanation. Then she detected it, the sound of footsteps behind her. Rapid. She didn't look back, simply increasing her pace. However, a sudden shove followed. Forceful. Her shoulder impacted the metal lockers. Her bag slipped from her arm and landed on the floor. "What's your problem, freak?" Tyler's voice echoed behind her, too loud for the space. Imani turned slowly, breathing through her nose. "I'm not bothering you," she said. "Do you think you can disrespect me in front of everybody and get away with it?" He stepped closer. "Go away, Tyler. Or what? I'll tell someone." He grinned. "Like who? Those teachers that don't even look at you?" Please. Imani didn't move, didn't blink. Tyler looked down, then abruptly reached for her backpack. She moved to obstruct him. A misjudgment. He pushed her again, this time using both hands. She stumbled. Her shoe snagged on the wall trim, and her head impacted the corner of the locker with a muted, unpleasant sound. She fell to the floor, as if her supports had been severed. A moment of stillness followed. Even Tyler recoiled slightly. Imani remained motionless. Blood began to trickle down the side of her face, a single streak across her cheek. A janitor located down the hall abruptly rounded the corner. His mop stopped in its motion. "Hey, what is happening?" he exclaimed, hurrying toward the scene. Tyler ran. The ambulance arrived in just minutes. The principal appeared suddenly, with a phone in hand, a worried tone of voice, and a visibly pale expression. The quiet moment they had previously afforded Tyler had vanished. By the time Darius received the notification, Imani was already at Springdale Medical Center. A nurse informed him that she was awake but required stitches. She sustained a mild concussion and had swelling on the left side of her face. He remained silent. He entered her room, his eyes carefully observing every detail, as if committing it to memory. She appeared smaller in the hospital bed. Not delicate, merely smaller than he recalled. She turned her head slowly upon seeing him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That was what affected him deeply. "Don't," he said, kneeling beside the bed. "Don't apologize." Her lips trembled. "You instructed me to inform you when I required your presence. I am here now," he stated. He remained still. He sat with her for hours. He barely blinked. Nurses came and went. At one point, he asked one of them, gently, how many times the school had called about incidents with Imani. The nurse looked at her chart, then looked back at him. The answer was none. He stared straight ahead after that. When they finally got home, Imani went straight to bed. Darius didn't. He sat in the dark at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes locked on a spot on the wall. He rose, proceeded to the rear closet, and retrieved an aged shoebox. The contents were innocuous. No weapons were present. No firearms. No blades. Only a folded sheet of paper, a photograph of a man he hadn't seen in 10 years, and a telephone number penned in diminishing blue ink. He examined it intently. Subsequently, he grasped the telephone and initiated a call. "Hello?" A voice responded. "It's me," Darius stated. A pause ensued. "Didn't expect to ever hear from you. I require information." "Regarding what?" "A boy. Caucasian. 13 years old. Tyler McHale." A mobile phone notification. A moment of silence. What is the meaning of this? He had admitted my daughter to the hospital. A lengthy pause followed. Then, one day prior, Darius terminated the call. He remained motionless, suspended in quiet. A part of him, long suppressed and deeply concealed, began to react. It wasn't anger, not even aggression, simply heightened awareness. However, making a call of that nature meant inviting consequence. And once a path was opened, unwelcome elements often entered, difficult to retract. 15 years ago, Darius Reddick was recognized under a different identity. In Savannah, the name Deke commanded attention. He wasn't boisterous, nor did he act impulsively, yet he consistently achieved his objectives. His methods were subtle, a quietness that instilled unease. Debts were settled, and disappearances were understood, thanks to him. He avoided direct violence, except in matters close to him, which were infrequent. Deke didn't seek a leadership role. He shunned the public eye. He positioned himself just behind those in power, and that's where true influence resided. But then Marissa became pregnant. Marissa wasn't living on the streets. She was pursuing her education to become a nurse. She was known for her beauty, directness, and intelligence. When she informed Darius they were expecting a child, a change occurred within him. He began to contemplate his lasting impact. He thought about what his daughter would perceive when she looked at him. He worried about the number of falsehoods it would require to conceal his true identity from her. Marissa did not survive the delivery. A tragic accident occurred. A rainy night, a drunk driver. She was gone, suddenly. Without warning, Darius was left with only a 5-pound baby girl who inherited her mother's eyes. Following this, he vanished, abandoning Savannah. He severed connections, sold the vehicles, concealed the cash, destroyed the phone, and relocated to smaller towns, securing unassuming jobs and maintaining a solitary existence. For 14 years, he erased himself from view, all for Imani. However, the phone call he initiated that night, after observing her at the hospital, marked the beginning of the unraveling. The individual he contacted, Terrence Bug Nichols, was not a friend. Not really. More like someone utilized when results were needed without interference. 3 days after the call, Bug sent a message. Tyler McHale, son of Curtis McHale, was with Mobile PD. Curtis ran a side job for a while, moving product through impounded vehicles. He was caught 5 years ago, but avoided conviction on a technicality. He still wears the badge. Still corrupt. Darius considered this information. He did not desire vengeance. This was not about harming a child. Understanding that his father was a man who abused his authority to manipulate people was a different matter. It suggested Tyler was acting aggressively because he's avoided repercussions. Someone had instilled in him the belief that there would be no accountability. This ignited a deep anger within Darius, an anger he hadn't felt in a considerable time. He drove across town that night. He parked a few blocks from an old warehouse by the train yard. He knocked once, then twice slow. Bug answered. His face appeared older. His body seemed thicker, but those eyes, still cold. Thought you were out for good. Bug said. I was. Bug gestured for him to come inside. So what changed? Darius looked around. Metal shelves, old crates, a faint hum of radio static in the corner. I need to scare somebody. Bug raised an eyebrow. Scare. I want the message to land, but no blood. Bug chuckled. That ain't your usual style. I'm not that man anymore. Bug looked at him for a long second, then nodded. All right, I got someone who owes me. Real discreet. Ex-military. Now works security. He will leave a note they will remember. No threats. No harm. Just presence, Darius stated. Bug grinned. You want to haunt the man. Precisely. 2 days later, Curtis McHale returned home to discover his front door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen. However, every drawer had been opened, and his framed awards were placed face down. A single Polaroid photo rested on his recliner, an image of Curtis from 5 years ago, hands cuffed, head down, flanked by officers. On the back, a simple sentence. If anything happens to my child again, yours is next. Curtis failed to report the incident. He understood the protocol. This was not something you concealed. During that same week, Tyler ceased attending school. There was no official notification. No farewell. Imani observed his absence, but remained silent. She returned to her classes, head held high, quiet, but no longer concealed. However, Darius recognized that revisiting the past doesn't always allow it to settle. Occasionally, it resurfaces with anger. The house phone rang shortly after 11:30 p.m. Darius seldom answered calls from numbers he didn't recognize, but a feeling compelled him to answer. He remained silent, simply waiting. A low, familiar, and dry voice spoke. You made noise, Deke. Darius paused before responding. Then he requested silence, just a presence. The voice emitted a chuckle. Yeah, well, some presence echoes louder than you think. Darius gripped the phone more firmly. Who is this? The voice inquired. You remember Devin Mars? That name caused a sharp, uncomfortable feeling in his throat. Devin Mars had previously worked as a problem solver in Savannah. Uncompromising, precise, and driven by ambition. Darius had wronged him several years prior when Mars threatened someone Darius valued. The incident concluded with a tense confrontation that was never discussed. Until now, he currently resides in Pensacola, involved in real estate, nightclubs, and politics. His child attends Halston Prep. Rumors suggest he's become aware of your name once more, and he's displeased. Darius leaned back in his chair, the kitchen clock ticking behind him like a countdown. I'm no longer part of that world. Then why was your name being circulated again? Click. The line disconnected. For the next hour, Darius remained silent. His thoughts raced. Devin Mars did not forgive, and he did not forget. If his name was being passed around, that meant others were paying attention as well. It wasn't just about Tyler anymore. It was about what people believed Darius might become again. The mere thought of it made his stomach churn. He recalled Imani, how she used to fall asleep on his chest. She remembered how she'd learned to walk with her arms out like wings. He'd promised her a different life, a quiet one. But quiet wasn't always safe. At school, people noticed Imani was walking a little taller. She didn't smile much, but her silence now felt different. Less like retreat, more like strength. Her teacher, Miss Kendrick, pulled her aside after class. "I just want to say I'm sorry we didn't do more." "We should have," she said. Imani looked her in the eye. "I am not relying on others to act appropriately anymore." Miss Kendrick stopped. "You possess more strength than you realize." However, strength was insufficient on its own. On that Friday, a black SUV with tinted windows arrived outside the school precisely as the final bell sounded. The vehicle was not the property of a parent, and it remained parked. Imani observed it. A feeling, not of fear but of familiarity, churned in her stomach. She didn't know who was inside, but she had seen a car like that previously, back in Savannah. Following her grandmother's funeral, she informed her father that evening. Darius didn't inquire. He simply moved to the rear room and retrieved a phone from a drawer. Instead of contacting Bug, he dialed another number. A woman answered, her voice raspy, reminiscent of gravel and whiskey. "It's been a long time, Deke." "Too long, Tanya. I heard you went soft." "I did on purpose," he replied. She chuckled once. "That's good, but now you're calling. I need eyes on a vehicle." A black SUV with Florida license plates was parked outside Halston Middle School. A moment of silence followed. Then, a voice said, "I'll have something for you tomorrow." That night, Darius remained near Imani's bedroom door. This wasn't due to a lack of faith in the locks. It was simply the spot where he felt most at ease. The following day, Tanya returned the call. "The vehicles are connected to Mars nightclub. They are not registered in his name, but his driver utilizes them. Imani's school is not part of his typical route." Darius took a deep breath. He is currently not taking any action. He was either sending a message or anticipating one from you. That afternoon, Darius drove to Pensacola. There were no weapons and no threats. Only an old envelope containing a picture of Marissa, Imani's mother. He gave it to the security guard at Mars Club. He instructed the guard to tell Deke that this was now the only thing that mattered, and that if anything happened to her, he would not engage in conversation. The guard remained silent, accepting the envelope and retreating as if it were hazardous material. Darius did not wait for acknowledgement and returned home in silence. When individuals such as Mars are provoked, they do not allow the matter to drop. They identify vulnerabilities, and Darius possessed one. It began with a package. Small, plain, without a return address. It was sitting on Darius's porch 2 mornings after his trip to Pensacola. He understood he should not touch it immediately. He examined it, studied the corners. There were no wires. There was no unusual weight. Nevertheless, he opened it outdoors, cautiously, using a pocket knife he hadn't used in years. Inside was a USB drive. Nothing else. He brought inside. He connected it to the older laptop he's kept isolated from network. The screen displayed a solitary video file. It was labeled property. He initiated playback. Grainy security camera footage from a grocery store parking lot appeared. Imani was visible near the front entrance, using her phone. Then a figure entered the scene. He didn't approach her. He didn't speak. He simply stood across the lot facing her, watching. Subsequently, he walked away. The camera followed his movement. He was a white man, with a shaved head, wearing a blue jacket. A face Darius recognized. An old Mars enforcer. Still alive, it seemed. No warning had been given. None was necessary. The meaning was unmistakable. We could contact her whenever we pleased. Darius shut the laptop and remained motionless for a considerable time. Afterward, he entered the bathroom and studied his reflection. He no longer resembled Deke. The beard was flecked with gray. His hands appeared heavier than before. Yet something within him, something cold and sharp, remained untouched. He picked up the phone and initiated one last call. "It's important that they all be present," he stated. 3 hours later, he found himself in the back room of a car shop in Foley. 5 men were seated around him. Each possessed a history they hadn't documented. "Tell me why we're here," one of them inquired. "They threatened my daughter," Darius responded. There was no request for verification. His delivery wasn't challenged. "They intend to intimidate me into submission, but I've remained silent for 14 years. That's sufficient." "So what's the plan?" Darius asked, leaning forward. "We avoid direct confrontation. We pursue the underlying causes. Every man Mars is connected to is exposed. We illuminate them. Their records, their deals, their back channels. We leak everything." "You trying to destroy him?" Darius stated. "I'm reminding him that just because I walked away doesn't mean I forgot how to play." The men nodded. Over the next 3 days, Darius orchestrated a quiet demolition. Public records were sent to journalists. Photos were sent to wives. Hidden accounts were reported to the IRS. One of Mars' clubs suddenly got flagged for health code violations. Yet another establishment lost its liquor license abruptly. The process was handled discreetly and legally. However, the implications were unmistakable. By Friday, the SUV ceased appearing at Imani's school. Mars became silent. There was no retaliation, no communication, but the situation remained unresolved. That evening, Imani returned from school and discovered Darius at the kitchen table with the envelope from the club placed before him. She sat opposite him. For the first time, she inquired, "What did you used to do?" He regarded her for a prolonged period. Then he responded, "I engaged in actions I regret, actions that instilled fear in people, actions that ensured our sustenance." She acknowledged this slowly. "And now I'm striving to become someone different." She paused. "But you reverted to those actions to safeguard me." "I reverted to protect you from those who disregard the established guidelines, not out of desire, because it was necessary." She remained silent for a moment. "I wish to no longer experience fear," she stated finally. He reached across the table. "You're not anymore." They remained seated for a while. As evening approached, no elaborate words were needed. It was a moment of shared understanding between two people. The following week at school, Imani offered to read her essay in English class. Her voice was steady. The essay explored courage, not the dramatic kind seen in films, but the courage to appear regardless, to speak even when hesitant, and to remain upright despite external pressure. Following the class, Ms. Kendrick offered a subtle smile, conveying a sense of pride. Imani returned the gesture, a quiet but genuine expression. Darius understood that peace achieved in this manner invariably demanded a price. He only hoped he had paid sufficiently. Spring arrived in Mobile Sutley that year. The trees bordering the schoolyard became vibrant and lush, and the days extended slightly. It had been nearly 2 months since Imani had last seen Tyler McHale's face. She never learned precisely what had transpired with him. Speculation circulated. He transferred schools. His dad took a leave. His family relocated. However, no one provided verification, and Imani had no desire to inquire. Her attention was now directed elsewhere. When Northwood High School announced the annual student-led assembly, Ms. Kendrick urged Imani to participate, to do more than simply attend, to speak. Initially, she felt unsure. However, something within her changed. A form of understated bravery emerged. It wasn't boisterous or flamboyant, but resolute, much like herself. Consequently, she registered. On the day of the event, as her name was announced, the gym grew almost silent. Teachers leaned forward. Students ceased their whispers. Imani walked to the podium with her hands at her sides. Her notes were folded in one pocket, untouched. She surveyed the crowd. Rows of students who had once laughed at her now ignored her or simply averted their gaze. And she began. "My name is Imani Reddick. A few months ago, I wished no one would know my name. I didn't want to be noticed. I believed that staying quiet would keep me safe." She paused. But silence doesn't always guarantee safety. Occasionally, it merely renders you unseen by those who could offer assistance. It was painfully obvious to those who intended harm. Several people looked my way, and some averted their gaze. I experienced bullying. It wasn't due to any action on my part, simply because I didn't align with someone else's preconceived notion of how I should appear. It was a painful experience, and it diminished my sense of self. She briefly looked towards the back of the gym, where Darius stood partially obscured, with his arms crossed, observing her. However, I realized that silence does not equate to strength. Understanding when and to whom it's important to speak, that is strength. I believed I needed to manage everything independently. I was mistaken. She averted her gaze, then returned her attention upwards. I now have an advocate for me, not simply offering verbal support, but demonstrating tangible assistance. And I want every person present to acknowledge this, particularly those who have felt as I once did. You are not obligated to face challenges alone. The initial response was silence, a pause where the words resonated powerfully and truthfully. Then, a single clap broke the stillness. It was followed by others, until the room was filled with applause. Imani moved forward without a smile. It wasn't necessary. Her words carried the impact. Following the assembly, several students came to speak with her. They were subdued and showed deference. Many simply expressed their gratitude. Others offered their apologies. A few inquired about spending time together. She paused, considering her response. That evening, back at home, Darius prepared grilled chicken on the patio. The aroma of charcoal and sweet onions filled the air. Imani sat close by, her knees drawn to her chest, observing the dancing flames. "Did you truly mean what you expressed?" Darius questioned. He flipped the meat once. Then he glanced at her. "Your mother. She used to speak like that." Imani smiled. "You think she'd be pleased?" "I know she would." A silence followed. "She'd also say I'm allowing you to mature too quickly," he added. Imani laughed once. "You sort of are." He chuckled. "I suppose we're both learning." Later, as the sun dipped behind the houses, they sat in quietness. Not the kind they used to carry around like armor. This quietness was different, lighter. Imani didn't require her father to be flawless. Her need was simply for his presence. And Darius, acknowledging all he had done and all he had concealed, understood that safeguarding her didn't invariably involve burying the past. Occasionally, it meant accepting responsibility for it, so she wouldn't have to. Existence rarely offers a complete escape from sources of pain. Yet it provides a choice. Remain silent, or voice your truth. Walk independently, or accept another support. Imani opted to speak, and Darius chose to listen. This is how they found healing. As a united front. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to see more. Each story we share explores authentic choices, real people, and the resilience needed to progress, regardless of your beginnings.